For us, we have a belief in authentic endorsement, and at SKIMS, of course, we do quite a bit in social media influencers. And so when I started, this to me felt like a natural extension of that. And so for us in measurement, we don't have as many signals. We don't have promo codes, which oftentimes is the backbone or a really important piece. The gold standard of measurement, as we know, if you can get it, is correlation or media mix modeling with incrementality testing or geo holdouts. Easier said than done for a variety of reasons. Costs a lot, takes a long time, imprecise in a lot of ways. And then, so a lot of that leads to us, from an attribution standpoint, using what we have. It could be a post-purchase survey, which all of you probably use and know is very valuable. It could be promo codes, could be vanity URLs. Trying to combine those, tactically matching on an order ID or something like that. But I think it's really hard, as all of us know, and harder than other channels, particularly digital, over the last 10 years prior to GDPR and recent privacy has made it feel like we have certainty around attribution. We don't have that same certainty, but we're kind of just going back to prior to that.
Welcome to the Media Roundtable, Special Edition. I'm your host, Giles Martin. In the Media Roundtable, we talk about the business of audio in service of the Chief Audio Officer, marketers responsible for turning their audio program into a major driver of growth. You've heard us talk about the Chief Audio Officer Summit a few times, where we brought together great brands to learn from each other in a way that has never been done before. The clip you just heard was from Paul Hillen, VP of Performance Marketing at SKIMS, who was speaking at a panel on the event. This particular panel was about measuring the success of your audio advertising campaigns and the challenges presented with audio attribution. We're sharing the recording of that attribution panel with you all today. The panel was hosted by me, Giles Martin, EVP of Strategy and Insights at Oxford Road, and featured Paul Hillen, who you just heard, VP of Performance Marketing at SKIMS, and also Vanessa Stark, Senior Marketing Manager of Performance Marketing at Instacart, and Jessica Tennant, SVP of eCommerce at Bello. Each of these panelists are true Chief Audio Officers representing leading brands in audio. Some of the topics they discussed were integrating the measurement of audio with other channels measurement, the impact of privacy restrictions on the future of measurement, and navigating internal conversations and driving alignment on performance. A lot of topics were covered, which is why we wanted to share this conversation with you today. So sit back and let's dive into the world of audio attribution.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for your attendance today. Now's the topic that we're all really excited about. I know, attribution, a matter close to everyone's heart. I'm Giles Martin, the EVP of Strategy and Insights at Oxford Road. And I've been with Oxford Road for about 5 years, tend to handle anything related to attribution, data, analytics, research, those types of things. And we have a fantastic panel here today. Paul Hillen from SKIMS, Vanessa Stark from Instacart, and Jess Tennant from Bello. Why don't you guys each take a minute or so to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your role and a bit of your history.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me up here. It's fun to be in a room and see a lot of people I haven't seen in a while and meet a lot of new folks. My name is Paul Hillen, VP of Performance Marketing at SKIMS. Our team is responsible for the paid media. I've been here a bit under a year, and prior to that, spent almost 6 years at Tommy John. There's some folks that work together there, and which is the connection to Oxford Road. So excited to be here, and I'll pass it off to the others.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Vanessa Stark. I'm on the marketing team at Instacart. I've been there about 2.5 years, focused on performance marketing, including audio advertising, but also oversee CRM programs. Prior to Instacart, did mostly performance and brand marketing at companies like Square, Google, and Charles Schwab. First foray into audio was back in 2016, doing podcasts with Square, so excited to talk more about how the whole landscape has evolved since then, but happy to be here.
We're just going to pass it on. I'm Jessica Tennant. I am SVP of eCommerce at Bello. We sell diapers, so if anybody has a baby, hit me up. I will give you friends and family because they're great and they're cute. And I run the e-commerce business, but also all of our growth marketing, and have been there 3.5 years. So pretty long time, and I'm super excited to be getting kind of back into the audio space after a while. I think for the last, call it 8 years or so, I've been at companies where we've kind of been limited with budget and availability to grow in channels. And I think we're in a time right now where even if we don't have incremental budget, I think all of us probably feel pretty comfortable pulling from Facebook and reinvesting in other places. And so I'm super excited to be working with the friends at Oxford again after it's probably been about 9 or 10 years since I worked with you guys, and getting back because I really believe in this space. My first time dabbling with audio was probably, I don't know, 13 years ago. I don't really know. That's kind of scary. Dan and Gary probably know because they're the ones who introduced me to audio, and figuring out how to test and learn and make it work in the capacity of whatever business you're at. So super excited to be on the panel with these guys too, and Giles is the man.
Okay, great. Well, let's start by asking about what methods that you use and have used to measure audio. Obviously, we've got digital channels, we've got non-digital channels. Paul, you've been 6 years at Tommy John, now at SKIMS. You've got lots of experience of doing different types of measurement. Let's start with you. Please just give us an overview and what you see as the strengths and weaknesses for each of those and how that varies by the different organizations you've been in.
Yeah, I'll start a little bit more theoretical or strategic, and then go into the tactical. So I think from a more theoretical standpoint, it starts with a belief in the channel and a belief in authentic endorsement. It's such a personal medium when you have your headphones in, where you feel like you're part of a show. I can't remember, I was listening to somebody before, but you might spend more time with your podcast host than you do with your friends or family or your spouse, which is pretty crazy to think about. And I think as marketers, you brought up Facebook, I think about this sometimes is a lot of times we interrupt people, and the more our ads don't interrupt people within the medium, and the better they are, this gets the creative panel, the more effective they are. And you think about it from your perspective as a consumer. So for us, we have a belief in authentic endorsement, and at SKIMS, of course, we do quite a bit in social media influencers. And so when I started, this to me felt like a natural extension of that. And so for us in measurement, it's we don't have as many signals. We don't have promo codes, which oftentimes is the backbone or a really important piece. The gold standard of measurement, as we know, if you can get it, is correlation or media mix modeling with incrementality testing or geo holdouts. Easier said than done for a variety of reasons. Costs a lot, takes a long time, imprecise in a lot of ways. And then, so a lot of that leads to us, from an attribution standpoint, using what we have. It could be a post-purchase survey, which all of you probably use and know is very valuable. It could be promo codes, could be vanity URLs. Trying to combine those, tactically matching on an order ID or something like that. But I think it's really hard, as all of us know, and harder than other channels, particularly digital, over the last 10 years prior to GDPR. And recent privacy has made it feel like we have certainty around attribution. We don't have that same certainty, but we're kind of just going back to prior to that. So to wrap that up, I would say it starts with a belief and selling in the belief in the channel internally, if that's what you need to do. One of the things that I think has been helpful to us as we've just dipped our toes in at SKIMS the last couple months is the reads are so strong. And when we're able to share those internally, that really cuts through and showing the type of ad that we get out of this channel is so much more authentic than you can get out of, running other paid mediums. And so I think if you're selling it to yourself or selling it to your org, I think it starts with that from a strategic standpoint. And then from a tactical, trying to make decisions, knowing that you're not going to have perfect data, but trying to make do of what you have in terms of sources of data and then resources. So that's the way I think about it.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Yeah, sure. So I can talk a little bit about how we think about doing audio attribution at Instacart. I would say we've been primarily focused on streaming music, but have started to try to spend more into the podcast space. And I think attribution is a key piece that we need to be thinking about how to evolve as we do that. So we currently do like an IP-based matching for our attribution, so we can look at the exposed IPs and the converting IPs and be able to match those up. That actually allows us to dedupe across other channels, which is really nice and allows it to sell more easily into more investment when we can kind of like be able to show, cross-channel interaction there. I would say the challenge is like we actually haven't really also done promo codes, or we don't have a post-purchase survey in place, and I think that's actually prevented us from being able to expand into additional inventory, especially on podcasts. And I think that's something where we need to make the case to kind of amend our attribution, which again, post-privacy changes is so difficult, to be able to triangulate various sources in order to kind of get to a better sense of what the truth is. So looking forward to hopefully selling that in internally and being able to expand to more inventory that we've kind of historically not been able to really, move forward with because of the lack of measurement.
I think they've kind of hit on all of the pieces of the puzzle that I would have. I would say at Hello Bello, we do use promo codes. We're trying to promo less, as I think a lot of brands probably got sucked into that post-pandemic hangover e-commerce world of like, how do you just keep the juices flowing, right? So we're trying to pull back on promos, but we will for sure be using promos to track. I'm a huge proponent of vanity URLs. I think anything you can do to get that extra touch. And then I know that Paul touched on it, but I'm also a big proponent of incrementality testing, which is kind of how I originally was able to make radio work. You do it was lucky because it was a local buy in LA and a really big station in a big market, and hold out other markets and see what happens and really measure and have your post-purchase survey, have your vanity URL going, have your promo code, have every touch point you can have going while you're doing a test like that. And then you can say, okay, here's my multiplier for promo code, or this is really truly how many visits I'm getting, and really use that as your baseline in your test. And there's tools out there that do it these days. It becomes challenging when you're not, able to buy in specific demos. But I think you can also do that at a larger scale, which is just maintain your media mix. If you don't have IP tracking and you don't have promo codes, you don't have the ability to do kind of an incrementality test, you can do more of like a scale incrementality versus a holdout, and scale that media channel and hold everything else flat. And what happens if you're e-commerce? It's much easier. What happens to your overall CPA for the brand, or your cost per lead, or whatever your KPIs are? And just make it's a little bit more challenging when you have somebody like, Kim Kardashian, who I'm sure she posts one thing and it's impossible to do any sort of holdout test. But, those are the types of things that I think I've used across my testing and learning.
Thank you, guys. And one thing that actually catches my ear there that I think is super interesting is what you were saying, Vanessa, about when you've got that IP matching process in place, deduping those IPs against other channels. And I think one of the things that every marketer in here is concerned to work out is how that audio measurement solution you have, whether it's more survey-based or whether it's more digitally based, how do you integrate those results with the reads that you're getting on the other channels? Like, you maybe have internal data science team working on that, or maybe you're doing IP deduping, or you've got some other process. But I think that's a matter of interest for everyone, and I'd really appreciate if you could touch on how you manage that integration internally.
Yeah, in terms of how we kind of manage it across like analytics and our DS teams.
Yeah, and how you get to a place where you feel the audio results make sense and feel good, and they also sort of dovetail with the results that you're getting from social or other channels you're investing in, because often we see some of these channels getting over attributed in every area, right? If you're using, say, a 30-day post or a 7-day post, even all the channels are getting credit, and you're not doing that multi-touch piece. And so how do you manage that integration with the other channels in terms of your audio result?
Yeah, I would say I don't think we do it perfectly, but I don't know that anyone does. So as many channels as we can get that IP level granularity, that helps us be able to really, like I mentioned, dedupe across them. We actually have really tight attribution windows, so we don't necessarily have that issue. And we use, not unfortunately, but kind of a simple last touch, last click model right now. And we're able to kind of mostly trust the audio data because we do have that level of granularity. I would say the reason we probably don't have that post-purchase survey and the usage of promo codes, which we actually did just start testing this week with some podcast partnerships via a vanity URL redirect, is the fact that we can't dedupe those necessarily across another channel. So that's why it kind of becomes a little bit harder to make the case to be able to expand to inventory that doesn't allow IP tracking, but would only maybe allow us to track via a promo code or a vanity URL kind of click to redeem experience. And I would say we have to work very closely with our DS and marketing analytics teams to kind of come up with methodologies when there are pieces I would say paid social doesn't, because we're app based, so it's totally in its own. We don't dedupe it really very well across paid social because it's all through scan in the app store, so that becomes really difficult as well. So there's definitely a risk of still over counting a little bit because not all of the channels still can get that level of granularity anymore. But I think it's just as many sources as you can that can use the same level of granularity, the better, just so you can get that sense of what's going on, whether you use multi-touch or a simple last touch model. But I would say, yeah, it's just continuing to push for various triangulation of methods. Incrementality is super important. I think that has actually been a really big key of adding more trust to the audio program. I would say right now, the last time we did a test was about a year ago, and the results are pretty outdated. And I would say there's starting to be a little bit of a sense of, do we trust this attribution anymore because we haven't done an incrementality test in a while, and we're potentially getting a lot of repeat customers that would have already kind of ordered anyway. So I think that's going to be a huge step, kind of redoing that test and doing it on an ongoing basis is going to help give even more trust to our leadership and our marketing team about how audio is working for us, because the IP attribution has gotten us this far, but now it's about showing what's incremental from what we're driving.
Jess?
It's interesting to hear you speak of IP tracking because obviously that's a whole level of detail that a lot of us don't have access to. So I'm a little jealous of that, but also it limits you, right? Because if that's what you're used to and that's what it is really that ultimate metric that gets a little scary to get away from. I think when I started testing audio, over 10 years ago, the business I worked at only liked to buy things on a cost per lead. And except Google CPC, because they were we can only buy that on a cost per click. And everything was last touch, which we still use last touch too. Although now I think if they get rid of regular Google Analytics, we'll all be using some sort of random multi-touch attribution that Google Analytics is putting together for us. But I still think it's the best and most accurate way to put things on the most level playing field, as long as you understand where every media channel falls in the process of discovery and learning. So I think, obviously there is this awareness factor that plays a role in radio, and that is the hardest thing to kind of prove out, is where does it flow through? What other channels are these people coming from? And so how do you take people from an uncomfortable level of, okay, we buy on a CPL, to knowing that your average cost per lead, right, is $12 or whatever, and this radio channel you're testing right now is coming in at $250. That's insane. But at the end of the day, sit, measure, learn, be patient, and understand what's happening to the overall business, because some of these channels sometimes take time, right? So it's not going to happen overnight. Yes, some of your most successful podcasts, some of your most successful audio spots will, especially have a promo code, and you're giving them that reason to buy quickly. But do we always want to do that? Or do we want to really nurture these consumers and bring them in the funnel and get them to become valuable customers without such a heavy discount? And that stuff does take time. So I think it's important to be patient, but also understand where everything sits. And at the end of the day, Facebook is no longer what it used to be. So worst case scenario, I'm pretty sure you could beat a last click CPA from audio over Facebook probably most of the time these days. So that's a benefit for all of us with Facebook becoming more and more challenging, I think.
Yeah, thanks. And you guys raised some important topics, which, incrementality, I think, is huge for everyone. And also that point about, some of those radio investments, taking a longer time, and how you navigate those conversations internally and how you sell in those types of measurement approaches internally, I think is super interesting, and I hope we'll have time to get to that in a sec. I do want to hear from you on this topic as well, Paul, simply because, this notion of integrating the audio results with the results from other channels and sort of getting to a place of confidence is such an important topic for everyone. So please.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that are helpful is, one, when you build attribution, understanding the, let's say, different roles of different channels or tactics. So you want to have a healthy mix of driver channels or top of the funnel that are driving awareness and consideration. And then you need a healthy mix to actually get them through the funnel, whether that's search or email or Facebook retargeting, things like that. And so I think monitoring that overall mix is helpful. And then when you build your attribution methodology, understanding that as it goes into how you attribute weight to each. And then if you can have multiple different approaches and combine them, that's also helpful to come at it from a couple different ways. So that could be first touch and last touch. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but if you can have multiple different approaches and combine them together, or at least look at them to triangulate or have a couple different ways, that I think can help you gain confidence. The other thing too is I'm guilty of being overcomplicated in attribution methods. And the more assumptions you make, the more it can become a house of cards. So understanding what assumptions you're making, your confidence level in those assumptions, and sometimes simpler is better, even though it doesn't make you feel as smart. And so without going into specifics, there's people that are more experts in this in the room. I can see 5 of them right now. So I'll direct you to them after if you have specific questions. But from a mental framework, I would say multiple different approaches, be clear about your assumptions, and also be clear about the role of each channel and how important it is. I think as direct marketers, it depends on your org, but you can often be very, very focused on driving results today, and you have to justify that. But if you're too weighted to that, that will, you'll feel that in months or years later. And so it's important to have that mix. And I think audio tends to fall a little bit more in that driver channel of the first time you hear about a brand, or the first time you really say, oh, you know what, maybe I'll go try that. I've heard about it from my friends, but I'm in the market now, or I trust this person's advice. So that's what I would say.
I think that's super interesting. And, when we talk with clients, we're often talking about, podcast as a channel that is very efficient in the lower funnel, and it can do a great job there, and streaming. But it also is a channel that, drives a lot of really positive associations, and therefore it can shift brand metrics. And then, people often are hesitant to get involved in radio because it can be more difficult to measure. But we know a lot of reach can be bought very cheaply there, and it can be a channel that can really function very well upper funnel. So it's interesting to me to hear you guys talk about having that clear vision of how each channel is going to work, and also this notion of not all the media is going to drive the response today and tomorrow. And there's so much imperative in the market to sort of get results today and tomorrow. And so I'd love to hear you talk more, if you can, about those conversations you have internally about trying to help people understand the roles of channels, and will they actually buy in to this is going to return, next quarter or next year even, because those can be tricky conversations, I'm sure. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I can start just because it's very top of mind for us, or for me at least, because when we're trying to get things prioritized, whether that be like with an engineering team, a MarTech team, it's always about what is the impact that this can drive now and in this quarter as we're doing planning. And so it's been challenging to try to make the case that setting up things like a post-order attribution survey may not, help show a direct return in the very, very short term, but in the long term, it will help be able to understand the channels better and be able to really scale and spend more money and therefore drive more growth. So I think it can be challenging, especially when the business is in a situation where they want to show growth and they need to show growth right now. And I think that's where it becomes super challenging to make that case. But the role of each channel is super important to understand. And some channels can kind of play in the full funnel as well. And I think audio is one of those channels that luckily can play in that role. But I would love for us to be pushing for more upper funnel usage of the channel to be able to kind of drive that brand equity, that brand love, outside of just making it super transactional, which I think we're kind of a victim of with a lot of our performance marketing today.
I think there's so many ways I can answer this one. I think there's the current, everybody's situation is going to be different depending on where you are. So, even in my current job, when I first started, we were only a year-old business. The CEO was in the day-to-day on probably every single paid social call, paid search call, all of that. And he was a performance marketer and understood performance marketing. And so it was very easy, right? It was really easy for me to have conversations about where to go and what to do. However, he was kind of an old school performance marketer and didn't understand things that were more top of funnel. And so it was harder for us to get a lot of that stuff approved, especially because we were this new business that was like the hottest commodity and like COVID and our CPAs were next to nothing and we could pull back on media spend and still barely get our shipments out, right? Like we were trying to figure that all out. Well, fast forward to after the hangover, from COVID, and we're in a place now where, we sell diapers. So realistically, every 2 years, we have this revolving door of customers. And so brand awareness, it's not like, Instacart, where I started using it in the middle of the pandemic and I will never, ever stop, right? Like the LTV on that customer can be pretty big and similar to SKIMS, right? Like for us, we have an average customer kind of for 2 years when they're in diapers, and then we have some products they can buy, but other than that, it's this revolving door. So we got to this place where people knew about us from launch, but now 3 years later, they don't know who we are because they missed the whole media frenzy of who we were when we launched, but we don't have a media frenzy we can do anymore because we're not new, we're not cool. There's not all that excitement. So we have to go back to some of these old school tactics. And so I think audio is that perfect place. I think, I started my career in television. I think television is one of those perfect places too, even harder to measure, because I think anybody can kind of throw out a measurement tool and be like, oh, this is your cost per order. But if you see your baseline cost pers moving, it's challenging. But I think at the end of the day, it's just educating people that are in those positions you're talking to, having the right conversations, bringing the data. That slide that Dan showed earlier on where podcasting was and where it is now, right? On all those shows and all those people, like that type of data goes a long way with people who don't understand. And then just explaining kind of how all the channels work together and feeling confident about this is how we're going to measure it. This is how long it's going to take. And if we don't achieve X, Y, and Z, we won't do it again, right? And so out clauses are very, very, very good if you're talking to C-suites too. Oh, don't worry, we can always get out. Literally.
We love that.
Just build in an out clause.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, somebody said this a year or two ago, and I think it's good to remember that we as marketers always think about talking externally and convincing other people outside of our org to buy our product. We often don't spend enough time selling in our own org on what we do and why it's important. So I would say, and Jess touched on this, it's context specific. You may have a boss who is a performance marketer and it's easy, or a brand marketer and it's easy. You may have somebody that's never worked in marketing and is managing it for the first time, and you have to convince them that it's not a cost center. So just don't forget that that's also a feature and not a bug of your job, is selling internally. Is it the most fun? No, probably not. But it is a part of the deal, and I think I have to remember that sometimes. I think at SKIMS, it's great because we're such a brand-driven organization that understands, and Jens, our CEO, has said this publicly, that we can't just build the business off of performance marketing, buying $1 for $2. We have to build a brand and a product that is loved for the long term. And so when you have that type of philosophy, that's great. But you don't always have that. And so just remember, you have to be a bit of a chameleon to understand what the decision maker cares about, how they're making decisions, what KPIs they're held to, and how you can combine what you believe is the right thing to do with the way that they're making their decisions and the KPIs that they need to hit to be successful in their role.
Thank you. I've got a lot of other questions here. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to throw it open to the audience to see if anyone would like to ask a question instead. Do any of you use time to purchase in your post-purchase survey, and how does that impact media testing? That's a secondary question.
We don't have a survey yet. Trying to go one.
We don't currently have one live, but we will. There's a lot of really good, easy, non-app based, if you're on Shopify, things like that. But no, we don't. I'd be interested to hearing more about that. Because I've always used kind of GA as my proxy of like how long it takes somebody to make that decision. But that's an interesting topic.
Not something we've used yet either, but it's a good thought.
I'd like to hear more about that. Yes, sir.
I am a newbie to Pixels. I have never used Pixels for tracking before, but I'm kind of a little bit more old school, and I'm really excited to be testing out Pixels with this next buy we're going to be doing. So that's all I can say at the moment.
Pixels is how we're able to enable our IP-based matching and tracking, so it's super important for this channel and for being able to track and dedupe, as I was explaining before.
I would say from my perspective, it's one data point and attribution, not the data point. So certainly important and gives us a lot of measurement on places where we couldn't, but I'll stop there.
But do you and your teams internally and your management have confidence in the results that you're seeing through the pixels? Because obviously, in principle, it's a technology which seems very robust intellectually, but in practice, often, there can be hiccups and, sometimes there are difficulties, right? And that can undermine people's confidence in the measurement approach. So do people have confidence, in the pixel results at your organizations? I mean, that's not
I
for you
haven't
so
used
much,
them yet,
Jess,
but
for
I
you
can
guys.
see people are trying to avoid this question, so I'll take it. I personally, from what I've learned thus far, and I'm obviously, as I said, kind of newer to it, it seems to me the pixel is going to be most beneficial for optimizing media and not for measuring. That's just my marketing take so far.
Yeah. There's so many orders that come from unpaid activity for us that
SKIMS is a bit different.
view through is a concern with anything. So that's where just going back to it being one touch point as well as the gold standard of incrementality. So as we start to utilize that more, incrementality testing is going to be really important to garner confidence in that, because to your point, Giles, and to a point that Craig and Dan has made today and last night, which is technology changes quite a bit, and we have to be adaptable just period. And so for us, it's again one touch point, as there are many attribution touch points that we don't rely on solely.
Yeah, +1 to the incrementality piece. I think that's always going to add more trust. There definitely is some, I wouldn't say issues, but we need to figure out a way to handle residential versus non-residential IPs. I think that becomes a challenge for us. Obviously, a lot of audio happening on the go. You're not necessarily sitting on your own Wi-Fi, and that actually has been a little bit of a challenge that we're trying to figure out, and can lead to a little bit less trust in the data because we have to apply some assumptions right now and like a little bit of a model to make assumptions about the non-residential IPs.
I just want to leave one thing since we're all here talking about audio, but a lot of people here do a lot more than just audio. And just your question was, do you trust pixel data from audio, right? Do people trust it? How many people in here use their Facebook pixel data to optimize their Facebook media? Either you don't buy Facebook media in here, or everybody's just like us at our business because it is not even directional anymore. So I think this isn't just a problem like for audio. I think this is just a problem in general with cookies and pixels, and there's only so much we can do. And so I think that's why we all continue to talk about incrementality testing, because as much as somebody like a Northbeam or a Triple Whale is going to sit here and pitch a multi-touch attribution that's like this magical thing, like it's still kind of like swirling your finger around and figuring out where it's going to land. But because you're looking at cookies and you're looking at media mix modeling and you're taking a shot in the dark, but incrementality testing is not that, and last touch is not that, right? So that's why I think we all kind of keep coming back to those things, and IP is great too.
So I think we're all sort of hitting the same type of note here, which I think has always really been the case, which is it's a good data source. It's an indicator, but there's no one of those indicators is the right indicator or the true indicator, and it is always about triangulation ultimately. And that's why having multiple viewpoints, having a survey, even if it's not the most technologically sexy thing, like it's another data point which gives you some guidance on how a channel might be growing once you start investing. We've just got a few minutes left, and I'm going to keep going. No one's got a burning question. We have a burning question. Yes.
I do have one question. I think it's more for you, Vanessa. How do you handle tracking back to an app specifically? Do you have any breakage with IPs or anything like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. We do. I think that the web to app piece is always kind of difficult for us, and especially with iOS 14 changes and scan, more so impacting like paid social channels. But I think the app tracking, it does work for us still, but there definitely is like risk of breakage, and that's where like when you're outside of your own like Wi-Fi network is where there becomes like more of an issue on mobile.
Yeah, the question is, I think, if I understand, is what is the relationship between social influencers and podcast influencers? And then when you were talking about personality versus platform, do you mean, is there a correlation, let's say, with a viral TikTok to TikTok paid advertising? Is that what you meant? I don't know if the correlation piece between those two is so tough at the size of the signal that we're seeing, so I wouldn't necessarily say that. So I'm going to go a little bit more theoretical again, which is we know there's some sort of halo effect, and you can start to, I think applying traditional media buying tactics to, you want to be looking at CPMs, understanding your impressions, but also knowing that not every impression is the same quality, which is partially why we're talking about an authentic influencer experience. And then looking at the quality of that endorsement. Now, you would love to get down to what are the listens to that, which technology, we're not totally there yet. So that's what I would say. It's maybe, I'm not sure that totally answers it, but to me, they're definitely different. And for us in apparel is very visual. And so I think in audio, it's kind of interesting for something that's so visual. But I think as you see a lot more simulcast and that becomes simulcast on YouTube, that becomes a great way for an unboxing or a try-on combination that maybe is where you see more connection between the two. And then maybe the next step there is, if somebody has a podcast and we're working with them, do we also work with them on social, et cetera? I think that makes sense. Have we found direct correlations yet? No. But they're probably there to some extent.
Very quickly, one more question, please.
I was just curious about the attribution difference, if you guys have seen across the different forms of audio ads, from baked in, dynamic, programmatic, streaming. As someone who personally only really buys baked in, I just wanted to see your guys' opinion.
The question was attribution between the different types of audio, so baked in versus DAI versus in read.
As in, are we seeing different types of performance from those different formats, or?
Performance and ability to track attribution.
Yeah, we primarily have been running DAI because of our requirement to do the IP-based tracking. I would say baked in, it's harder to do something like that. And that's where you want to triangulate it ideally with the other, the promo code, vanity URL, post-purchase surveys. So we don't have a lot of data between the two, just because we've been more focused on the DAI side.
I'm going to just go back to my old school DR roots and say whatever gets the best return on investment, right? So I think it really depends on the show, the person, the station, whatever it may be. So I'm going to go with like buying it as most cost effectively as possible could get you that best return. So and I think it depends on the channel, right? Are you going to spend 50 times more to do, a host read versus something that's canned and dynamically inserted? I'm going to be hard pressed to find that to work better on the same network or the same station or the same channel. So I think it's just important to think those things through, because you can still get that authentic content on that audio, but in different ways and different approaches. So that's kind of my...
I think I'm going to cut us off there, Paul, if you don't mind. That's all the time we have, guys. Please don't hesitate to ask any of us questions later on. Let's keep the conversation going all day.
That was the Audio Attribution panel at the Chief Audio Officer Summit. A big thank you to all the panelists. I hope you learned something to help you see your CPAs ever plummet and your ROAS ever increase. The insights shared by Paul Hillen, Jess Tennant, and Vanessa Stark provide a masterclass for any chief audio officer or marketer that wants to learn how to make their audio advertising work harder. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify. To build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you again to our guests and to Bianca, Kyle, Haley, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.